Hey, welcome back to Considering Christianity. My name is Brad Sarian, and I'm a pastor with Restored Church in San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. And we started this series last week, and we're trying to put out 2 a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'm really excited for the one today. I believe that today I'm going to put forward what's the most compelling argument for the existence of God that I know of. I did not create it. It's been used for thousands of years, but I really do think it is probably the most compelling reason to believe that God exists. And so I'm excited to look at Christianity from a philosophical lens today. And this whole series is really, it's for seekers, it's for skeptics, it's for those who are maybe considering Christianity and just want to know a little bit more about it. And it's also for Christians who want to understand their faith better and to be able to love and understand those who don't think like them or believe like them, and to be able to articulate what it is that Christians believe and what is the Christian worldview. And so that's my desire. And so today I get to talk about philosophy. I'm going to be kind of zeroing in on ethics. As I said in the first video, I think of myself as an amateur philosopher. I got my degree at Cal State Northridge, just a couple blocks that way. In philosophy, and really just loved philosophy. Philosophy is made up of 2 Greek words. It means lover of wisdom. And when I heard that when I was 18, I was like, that just sounds great. And I had a great experience, 4 years studying philosophy, sitting in classes and arguing and thinking deeply about life, about God's existence, about all these different things. And there's a few different main branches of philosophy. One of them is epistemology, which really studies the just knowledge. What does it mean to know something? What can we know? And there's metaphysics, which studies the nature of being and reality. What exists? How do we know something exists? And then there's logic. Logic traces rationality, and how do we go from premises to conclusions? And what does that mean for an argument to be logical? And then there was axiology, which kind of makes up ethics or values and aesthetics that really answer the question, what does it mean to be good or bad, right or wrong? Really diving into those types of questions. And so today what I want to do is really live in that ethics and axiology part of philosophy as we talk about what I think is one of the greatest arguments for the existence of God. And really what it is the greatest dilemma for the secular person, I believe, is their belief in moral truths without a basis for moral truths. So the greatest dilemma for the secular person is their belief in moral truths without a basis for moral truths. We all have beliefs. That was week 1. All of us have beliefs. If you were to ask me, hey, do you believe it's daytime? I'd look outside the window and give you a basis for why I believe it's daytime. The sun is shining. It's about 3 p.m. I just ate lunch a little bit ago. And so I've got some good basis, some good reasons for why I believe it's daytime. If I were to come to you and tell you that I believe that I am the President of the United States, you would then ask me, why do you think that? What's the basis for that belief? And if I just said, I don't know, I just feel it like deep down in my bones, I feel like I am the president, you would probably just walk away very quietly and write me off as very illogical, pretty crazy. And so all of our beliefs need to have bases for these beliefs. And for the secular person, when we talk about morality and ethics, what we're talking about are those statements about good and bad, right and wrong. And the secularist person, those who are agnostic or atheists, or just like, we're not sure if God exists, we're not even sure if it matters if God exists. This is a huge dilemma because 99.999% of people that I've met, secular, atheist, agnostic, would say that there are such things as moral truths, but they don't have a basis for those moral truths. And so they would make statements that, and this is going to be a video maybe for young ears in the room to kind of quietly have them leave, or pause the video until a better time. But most people would say things that are good, that they're good, like love and equality. Those are good things. And then there's bad things. There's things that we would say are wrong, like rape and genocide and murder and torturing innocent people. Anyone that you talk to is going to go, yep, good and bad. Now what's fascinating is that philosophers have put forward the fact that if we're going to talk about good or bad, it presupposes that we know the purpose of that object or being. Tim Keller mentions this in his tremendous book, Making Sense of God. And he's quoting a couple other philosophers. One, Alistair McIntyre, he talks about a pocket watch. And he says, imagine I have a pocket watch. and I said this is a good pocket watch. In order to say something is good, we have to know the purpose of it. What's the purpose of a pocket watch? It's to tell time. So if it's a good pocket watch, it tells time accurately. If it's a bad pocket watch, it does not tell time accurately. And McIntyre says, imagine I throw this pocket watch at a cat, and it misses the cat. And then I say, what a lousy, bad pocket watch. You'd go, what do you mean it's a bad pocket watch? It's not intended. The purpose isn't to be thrown at cats, so whether you hit it or miss it. That's not the purpose of a pocket watch. Yet, when we use moral statements like good and bad, what it does is it presupposes we know the purpose of human beings. So when we go, that person is good or that action is good, we have to know what the purpose of a human being is in order to make a value statement like that. If there is no purpose for humanity, which an atheistic evolutionary standpoint with no God would have to say that there's no real purpose to life. We are just a cosmic accident. Yuval Noah Harari says evolution has no purpose to it. Then we're left without words of good and bad for moral and ethical situations. And so I do want to clarify something very, very important. I am not saying that in order to be a good person, you have to believe in God. And if you don't believe in God, you're going to be a bad person. That is not true. That is not what Christians or theists ever mean by this argument. So you have to listen carefully. It's not that we're saying you have to believe in God in order to be good. It's that without God, there is no language even for an objective good or bad. It really comes down to, if there's no God, if there's no source of truth outside of us, I'm simply the subject and you're the subject, and we may have differing opinions on what's good and bad, like broccoli. I could come to you and go, broccoli is good. And you could say, broccoli is bad. And that's the end of that conversation. I can't go to a source and go, no, look at this. This is true. Broccoli is good. If there's no God, we ourselves are the source of what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. So morally speaking, you can say, I don't like that. I think that's bad. I feel that's bad. But you can't say objectively that there's a truth outside of you and go, this is bad no matter what. No matter how many people in Nazi Germany believed that killing Jews was wrong. We don't vote on morality. It was wrong. And we know that deep down. So this is the moral argument. It has two premises, two statements, and then a conclusion. The first premise is this. If God does not exist, neither do moral truths nor moral obligations. If God does not exist, neither do moral truths nor moral obligations. So this is very important for us to grasp. And many atheists, most secular people would acknowledge that this is true. If there's no God, then we really are just here by accident, and who's to say what's right and wrong? Yuval Noah Harari, one of my favorite atheists and historians, in his book *Sapiens*, he points this out very brilliantly and just logically from an atheistic perspective. He says, according to the science of biology, people were not created. They have evolved. And they certainly didn't evolve to be equal. The idea of equality is inextricably intertwined with the idea of creation. The Americans got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul and that all souls are equal before God. However, if we do not believe in the Christian myths about God, creation, and souls, what does it mean that all people are equal? Evolution is based on difference, not on equality. And so, from an atheistic perspective, he's like, yeah, there's no such thing as right and wrong. We're all just here, and that's what it is. We can't go to a source outside of ourselves and go, no, this is the real truth. And this is what Friedrich Nietzsche was the first one, not the first one by any means, but one of the main voices in the Western world to go, if God is dead, this changes everything. If God is dead, why do we keep living as if he exists and saying this is good and this is bad? If we're merely products of evolution, then all we could do, we're just like animals. We're evolved chimpanzees. And when we see nature taking its course, you never see a lion killing a zebra and calling it murder and trying to press charges. No, you just go, that's what happens in nature. This is what happens, and that's how life is. And if all we are, and I mentioned in the last video, I believe in evolution. I believe you can be a Christian and agree that evolutionary theory is true, but evolution with God, if there's no God and evolution is true, then we are only evolved animals. And so this is not just with murder, but it is things like rape, and this is sickening. But zoologists would call it forced copulation when it comes to chimpanzees or animals. It's not even called rape because their animals are different. And in my senior thesis paper at Cal State Northridge, I wrote that the whole thing was Nietzsche's philosophy on morals, and atheists cannot say that rape is wrong. And I argued as best I could with the worldview of atheism, saying you can say I don't like it, it's not good for society at large, but you can't say it's wrong. Because it really comes down to the person and what they deem as right and wrong. And no one would look at animals and say, hey, chimpanzees, that forced copulation, you should go to jail for that. That's immoral. No. Chimpanzees do it on purpose. They just are animals, and they do what they do out of their desires. And if all we are as humans are merely evolved chimpanzees, then who's to say my desires are different than someone else's desires? This is the dilemma that the secularist has. And if the secularist is like, well, obviously we're different than chimpanzees. We're smarter. We're smarter in some ways. Obviously, on a computer, I can outmaneuver a chimpanzee on a computer. But if a chimpanzee and I are in nature, he's going to survive better than I can. A chimpanzee is smarter than me in some regards. And if it just comes down to intellect, what do we do with babies, toddlers, or those who have disabilities in regards to their intellect? If it's just intellect that separates us from chimpanzees, then some humans can be treated however others want them to be treated? Or is there an inherent difference between a chimpanzee and a human being? But if God doesn't exist, neither do moral truths, neither do moral obligations. We can't say you ought to do this, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. But the second part of the premise of the argument is this: moral truths and obligations do exist. Moral truths and obligations do exist. We just know it. If you remember week 1, we talked about what is truth. Truth is whatever corresponds to reality. And so when we say, I just know that things like rape and genocide and torture, they're wrong. Why? Because it corresponds to reality. My experience of this thing is that it's so wrong. I just know it. It doesn't matter who votes on it. It doesn't matter what society or culture says. It's just wrong. I can't prove that I exist, right? I could be a brain in a vat, living in a matrix world, but my experience tells me otherwise. But the truth that corresponds to reality is that I do exist. I have senses. I can doubt my own existence, those types of things. And we believe the same thing is true with morality. So much so that there are many atheists on the other side of the few I've quoted that go, no, we do know morality is objective. We know that it's true. One of my favorites is Thomas Nagel in his book Mind and Cosmos. He's an atheist. He's a brilliant professor, is secular, and he's wrote this book and just kind of expressing his doubts about atheism and just the Darwinian worldview. And one of the chapters is primarily about value and ethics, and this is one of his biggest issues with it. And he's dialoguing with Sharon Street, who has a position that says, yeah, there is no such thing as objective moral truths with a Darwinian atheistic perspective. And he says this: I agree with Sharon Street's position that moral realism is incompatible with a Darwinian account of the evolutionary influence on our faculties of moral and evaluative judgment. So he's like, I agree. If there's no God, there shouldn't be such thing as right and wrong. Street holds that a Darwinian account is strongly supported by contemporary science, so she concludes that moral realism is false. I follow the same inference in the opposite direction. Since moral realism is true, a Darwinian account of the motives underlying moral judgment must be false, in spite of the scientific consensus in its favor. So Sharon Street says, hey, Darwinian makes sense. The Darwinian evolution makes the most sense of the science that we have. Therefore, there is no such thing as objective moral standards. And Thomas Nagel goes, but I know objective moral standards are true. So maybe Darwinian evolution isn't even true. And he's like, I don't even know what to do with this, because I know deep down that things like rape and torture and genocide, they're just wrong. But it's true. My atheistic worldview puts me in a spot where I can't even say that there's such a thing as moral realism, that there's right and wrongs, that love is genuinely good, that equality it's right, no matter what anyone thinks. And you have other atheists. Sam Harris, in his book, he wrote an entire book, The Moral Landscape. And it's basically his defense that there is such a thing as objective moral truths, that there are moral truths and moral obligations. The problem with his book is one, he says science can prove that. And I don't believe science can prove that. The other thing is he assumes that we all agree on what moral truth is, that he defines as well-being. Everyone knows that we should just pursue the well-being of society. It's like, dude, I agree as a Christian, but you can't just throw out a wild premise from an evolutionary standpoint. Just go, this is what it should be. Because chimpanzees don't agree with that. They would never say, we should just all get along and seek everyone's well-being. That's not how we came about, if evolutionary atheistic perspective is true. And so why would we randomly throw that in and go, this is now what the truth is for moving on forward? We can say we want that or hope for that, but you can't say it is a truthful statement. So there are definitely issues, but we know that moral truths and obligations do exist. And even the language we use, our culture loves the word progress. Progress, I love the word too, but progress implies an end goal. It implies that we're moving toward a truth. And so I agree progress. When we talk about the horrific history of even America with slavery based on race, horrific things. When that was abolished, we would say, yay, we made progress. But progress only means because we believe deep down that equality is a truth written into the fabric of the universe, that there's a source outside of us that goes, this is what is true. And so progress implies an end goal. Moral truths and obligations, they really do exist. And if we agree with those first two premises, then the conclusion is, therefore, God exists. Therefore, God exists. If God doesn't exist, neither do moral truths and obligations, but moral truths and obligations, they do exist. Therefore, God exists. This is, again, that definition. Truth corresponds with reality. If you remember week 1, I talked about those two, Ed and Walt. Walt said, hey, we can thrive underwater. Humans are meant to breathe underwater. You can say that, but that doesn't match with our reality. And two of the most common rebuttals to the moral argument is, one, someone will say, sure, there is no such thing as moral truth. Sharon Street says it. You all know Noah Harari says it. Friedrich Nietzsche says it. Richard Dawkins says it. Many atheists go, yeah, of course, there's no such thing as objective right and wrong. So you can say that. That can be your stance. When I wrote my paper and presented it in class in philosophy, that atheists cannot say that rape is wrong. The atheist students held their ground and said, you're right. We can't say it's wrong. Which was kind of like the zinger to me. And I'm like, okay, then just stay away from me and my family and my loved ones. Like, I'm glad you're sticking true to your logical conclusion, to your worldview, but yikes. And maybe it's true, but it sure doesn't seem to correspond with reality. And here's the fact. It didn't correspond to their life. I knew them. They're friends of mine. That's not how they live. They say it. And so it's easy to say stuff, but the question is, does this correspond with reality? Do they actually believe this is true of the world we live in? And most atheists are going to go, not really. The second rebuttal is just, no, God doesn't exist, but I just know that these truths exist. I just know it deep in my bones, which is fine. It's a possibility, but it's not a good argument. It kind of comes back to my argument. I am the president of the United States. I just feel it deep in my bones. It's like, okay, but there's no basis for it other than your feeling. And what do you do when your feeling disagrees with someone else's feeling, right? You go back to the Holocaust, you go back to Nazi Germany, and you're standing there with Hitler trying to persuade him to stop murdering innocent Jews. You just go, I just believe in my bones this is wrong. And he would tell you, I believe in my bones you're wrong. And the conversation's over, the argument's over. If there's no source of truth outside of us, then it's one person against the other, and generally the stronger one wins. And this is the world that I don't believe we live in. I believe there are objective truths. I believe that we live in a world where we know the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. It's because we are made in the image of God, that we are made in God's own image, and good deeds align with his character, and bad, wrong deeds are a distortion of who he is. It's a distortion of his character. But in the same way that there's a dilemma for the secular person and their worldview, there's a dilemma for those who are believers and theists, those who are Christians. But I believe that the Christian worldview gives the most compelling solution to the moral argument. See, if we concede to the argument, okay, therefore God exists, we don't get to finally go, yay! It causes us to sit back and go, okay, if God exists, and I do know what's good and bad, why do I have such a hard time actually doing what's good? if there is such a God who's just, because I feel deep in my bones when I'm wronged for this desire for justice. Now, if this God exists, I may not be just buddies with him just because I intellectually agree that he exists. But this is why I think the Christian worldview is the most compelling, because it doesn't just answer a cute little logical argument. It says that this God used his goodness to satisfy his own justice. God himself became a human. Jesus Christ, he lived the life as a perfect representative of humanity and said, you got yourselves into this mess, I'm going to get us out of this mess. As he took on humanity, paid for the sins of the world. He himself was the just and the justifier, as Paul says in Romans, that he maintained his justice. He didn't overlook sins. He didn't overlook evil and go, it's okay, not a big deal. No, he stared it right in the eye and said, I'm actually going to I'll pay for it. I'll be the one who deals with it. And so the Christian worldview puts us in a spot that not only do we acknowledge intellectually God exists, but he's a good and just God who desires us, wants us. We've been made in his image, and he saved us so that we can go out and bring his goodness and his justice into the world. And so I hope you'll join me for our next talk. We're going to be looking at Jesus in history. What can we know about the historical person of Jesus? Did he even exist? Who is he? What can we know? Is the Bible our only historical source of truth that we have? So I hope you'll be able to think deeply about these things, whether you're Christian or secular, and really bring them to God, to wrestle through them, bring them into community with friends, and think deeply on them. I enjoyed our time, and hopefully we'll see you soon.